Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's great to see everybody today. We see everybody's logging in right now, so just give us a moment so we can get everybody in. We are thrilled to have you today. It's great to see a lot of friends on. Welcome, welcome. I hope everybody's having a good Friday so far. Ready for an exciting weekend. I've got to share something really quickly before we start. I have two 15-year-olds who are going to their first high school dance tonight. So and it's hysterical since it's their first dance. They're at a school that doesn't have seniors yet, so they can't have a homecoming dance. So they're calling it the coming home dance. And today, this you're gonna love this. For Spirit Day, they had the kids wear party on the bottom and business casual on top. That was the theme. And one of my kids went to school in a collared shirt with suspenders with a Hawaiian skirt on today. You got to love it, right? I'll tell you this, well, it goes to humanity, which is something that our guest is going to talk about today. And I'm so thrilled that everybody's here. I'm sure we'll have some other people joining in, and I'll make sure I add them as we go along. But welcome to the leadership community of practice. We are thrilled that everybody's here today. Please take a moment to introduce yourself and chat. Let us know who you are and where you're coming from. We are thrilled that you are here, but I don't want to take much time because I've got to get to our speaker. Tonette Salter is with us today. And Tonette Salter, she's one of my favorite people in the world. Some of you know Tonette Salter and I have had the opportunity to collaborate for over a decade at this point, T, I think. But let me go ahead and read her bio because I want to make sure that I include all these wonderful components. Tonette Salter's leadership approach is simple: humanity first. She is committed to the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and explicit to race and systematic inequalities of underserved populations. Tonette has been in the trenches of this work for TK through 12 and higher education for 17 years. Her commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion for underrepresented individuals in education and the workforce is from her sharecropper grandfather, who was on the school board for over 14 years. Tonette has made presentations and designed professional development on inequities of systems, race, gender, racial equity, special populations, and veterans. Tonette believes in transformative change and uses her voice as a member. Sorry to stop there. Somebody just joined and uses her voice as a member of the California Student Equity Achievement Group, SEA, working on equitable funding, policy, and regulations to close the achievement gap. In 2021, Tonette Salter received the Rising Equity Award Rising Equity Award from the National Alliance Partnership of Equity, the NAEP organization. Tonette is a graduate of San Diego State University and earned her master's degree in psychology, emphasizing research and human performance. Tonette, for those of you who are on right now also, especially from our community college system, Tonette was one of the people that helped to get Strong Workforce pushed through. Many, many years ago, before Strong Workforce was actually a funding source for the community college system, Tonette was one of the leaders that was sent up to Sacramento to advocate on our behalf. And so, when those funds roll out, you remember there's a lot of people behind it that made that work. And Tonette Salter is one of those people. So with that, I would like to welcome Tony Salter. We are thrilled that you are here today, Tonette.
Oh my goodness, it's such a great honor. And what a wonderful bio. I tell you, when you hear somebody else present your bio, it's a whole different story. When I'm looking at it, I'm just like, oh, it just seems so boring. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm bringing in that human tone today. And so good afternoon and happy Friday, you guys. Yes. So last weekend, I want to talk about this. Last weekend, we were in this midst of Halloween, right? Sharing with family and gathering and celebrations with costumes and abundance of food and sugar and treats. And here we are, it's November. I don't know, but it's November, everyone. And so in November, what happens again? We have those gatherings again, and at the time of Thanksgiving. But what I want to talk about is those are those humanity pieces where we're excited, where we're happy. And Thanksgiving specifically and Christmas, I want to share that sometimes that triggers other emotions because we don't have the ones that we used to share those special holidays with, but we have our memories. Or those who were or don't have a family and they may be homeless. And those homeless individuals during this time, it's difficult for them because they don't have their family. I'm using all of this to say that that's humanity. And I want to set the tone of this particular space with my virtual space of my peers and those who are listening live, that we're in a humanizing space and we should continue to be in a humanizing space. Connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Tonette Salter, but as Renee, she calls me T because we go way, way back. So it's like that, you know, with me, it's like that. You can have a nickname for me as long as it's appropriate. I'm going to say whatever that appropriation is, I'll go with it and I'll answer with it. But I prefer to be called Tony. I'm all right with T too. So let's talk humanity as an educator. And this is definitely, I want to say, this is my perspective and my judgment and my definition of what it means to talk about humanity as an educator in the world that I'm in the spaces that I navigate, and what it means to me truly. And we'll start the slide presentation, but I want to start out with this. What it really means is free of judgment to me, free of biases, free of stereotypes, free of race, free of gender, free of sexism, free of religion. Okay, education allows us this path, right? Really, education allows us this path to be on our journey and define what our journey is as me, Tonette. What is my journey? What is my authentic experience? That's me being a human being. That's Renee, that's Bill. And I'm looking at the names. So I'm very much about humanizing this virtual space. So I'm not asking them, just making sure that we are engaged, because a big part of education is what? It allows us to have these principles. And the more principles and the more that we learn, we get to define and shape those principles for ourselves. So the more teaching and learning, it causes human interaction. Without human interaction, there is no teaching and learning. And that to me is bringing humanity into education and leading with humanity first. So let's start humanity. Next slide. And it's great to see all of you guys. So to me, I just set up, leadership is about the people. It's about us, the students, the staff, the administrators. Homeless, I'm using it as the labeling because there are people. Homeless is a label, but they are people. And we need to remember that leadership is about the people. It's not about the process and practice. That's some of it, but really it's about the people and leading with humanity first. Next slide, please. So a little bit about me and how I think of my leadership traits, and not just my leadership traits, but just traits of myself. I'm empathetic, immensely empathetic, because I've had a heck of experience professionally and personally. I'm humble, and not humble in a way like, oh, thank you so much, I don't really want to take that award, but humble in the sense of, I don't know everything. So when I'm coming to the table, I'm automatically coming in with that open space that, yes, I may have a vision because I'm a visionary. But those that are at the table when I'm presenting that visionary, that vision, I would say that vision, I'm humbling myself because I want to be open to your input, to your perspective. And that's that humanity aspect. I'm a listener because you have to be a listener to listen in to what the people that are around you are bringing and saying. I'm a challenger. Absolutely, I am a challenger and I'm owning that. But I'm also a challenger with myself. And challenger in the way from that component is, I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask you questions to think about a different perspective. And that can be looked at as challenging or questionable and curious. But I'm also doing that to do what? To empathize, to listen, to understand, which causes me to be ever evolving. I'm a visionary. I'm not much on the small. I do details and I'm organized, but the grand scheme, if you know me, I'm a big visionary, big picture person. I'm a motivator, and I can do all of this in calm. In my family, I'm known as the calm one. Whenever everything is up, I'm always just calm as we go through it. How do we be calm through this? I see your perspective. I see this person's perspective, but how do we do this in a calm way? And I really don't worry about temporary setbacks, because the journey, knowing that you have a journey in life, human, and putting myself, I'm a human, your students, your staff, you as administrator, classified staff, organizations, there's going to be setbacks. There's going to be temporary setbacks. We are in a pandemic. Setback caused a setback. I'm transparent and I'm very self-aware all the time. So those are my traits in terms of a humanity leadership approach. Next slide, please.
Annette, I've got to just chime in real quick. I love some of the things that you have here, because I think some of these characteristics, people as leaders wouldn't think to put it forward as part of your leadership characteristic. And you and I think one of the reasons we've worked so beautifully together is, and I've mentioned this before, we're like a yin and a yang. Everybody who's on right now knows that I am not calm. That is not my nature. But when you and I get together, there's like this balance. And so I think it's so important that you've labeled these characteristics that people might not have thought to put at the forefront here. But I think that also goes along to, you really think things through. And I think having your degree in psychology and your background in psychology, you bring this perspective that we don't all see first. So I really appreciate all these words that you decided to use in the About Me, because they were incredibly thoughtful. And I think they're thought provoking for those of us that are on right now.
Thank you. And I'll take any feedback about that. So before if anybody else wants to go input, because I do want to make this very much a interactive presentation. So, and I know that most people are listening very intently because I can see on the screen about that. So I talked about me and the reason why I went into those characteristics and traits. And I will say this, because here's the transparency. When I was asked this presentation on leadership, community of practice, it made me go through what is my traits. Okay, so I could go into like a challenger. Yes, I'm a challenger, and that could be difficult at times to some. So I'm just going to use that. I'm being transparent and being very honest, but it's really the piece of me being challenging is really I want to understand and empathize, and also make sure that we are thinking holistic, whole system approach, whole system change. So I'm thinking about students, the whole of the student. So that brings me to, what is it that I do? Well, at this current, I lead and provide leadership to the Joint Special Populations Advisory Committee, which is a statewide committee that's known as JSPAC. You know, the acronyms that we have in education, I'll even say in other organizations, you just do, because who wants to go around saying Joint Special Populations Advisory Committee? I mean, that's a whole lot to say. So it is a joint effort from the California Department of Education and California Community College Chancellor's Office, and joint effort in terms of funding. And I'm going to speak a little bit about, because I want to be conscious about those who are listening in live, but I know those who are probably in this virtual space with me is very aware of what funding and Perkins and career technical education. So if you could please bear with me while I go through this piece of my presentation on leadership and leading. So I was asked, not slide yet, I was asked from my employer, which is the Foundation of Grossmont Community College District, about 6 years ago. So again, I have this 17 years in the education form. About 16 years ago to basically take this advisory committee that was established in the 80s and bring them current. So with my leadership approach that you just saw, I had to bring a vision. Yes, Crystal, holistic change, love that, thank you. I had to bring a vision because this advisory became from the origins out of the fact that there wasn't a statewide effort and application and understanding of what special population students need. Right, so that's the origins of this, and it's funded by, the advisory is funded and mandated by Perkins. So that's where we get special populations. Next slide. That was in the 80s. There is, let's fast forward to where we are now. There is a tremendous amount of content and information about special population needs. And so let's talk a little bit about the CTE. We're funded, JSPAC is funded, and I mentioned that. We're funded by the community college. And so by Perkins. And so Perkins is the main federal funding source for career technical education. It's the primary source for high school, higher ed, and university CTE programs. So CTE's purpose, just really quickly, is to prepare workers to what? Meet their needs and employee needs in a variety of occupations. So I put here dental assistant, pharmacy technicians, welders, and automotive technicians, but I'm gonna put a little shout in there because we never ever talk about this, but it also means teacher workforce. And I call it teacher workforce, but it's early childhood education that falls under career technical education. So we'll talk a little bit about origins, and I promise you the reason why the origins is extremely important and very important for me too as a leadership. In my leadership, I always want to know the origins of something. I don't like to come in and you tell me, this is just me, and you tell me, well, this is how it is, and this is what we do. Well, then not trying to change and growing that aspect and changing the whole system. That is from my lens that I come in national perspective. So the origins, so vocational ed, 1917. And forgive me if I get cut off, but I just saw that my internet connection is unstable. Thank you.
You were okay, Tonette. It just like froze just slightly, but then it caught up. But
what did I miss out on? What did I miss?
It like just glitched a little bit. I wasn't sure if it was you or me, so it wasn't bad.
Okay. So I'll jump in really quickly about the advisory. They're made up of 25 representatives from the California Department of Education, as well as the California Community College Chancellor's Office. We modify the representatives from the California Community College Chancellor's Office are from the consortiums, the 7 consortiums. The other aspect of the K through TK through 12, it's designed by the California Department of Education's map and geographic region. So those representatives are come together now that we have the virtual space every other month. And usually I task them with a question or something that revolves around special population students on what is going on in their local region, local or regionally. So that helps JSPAC design what our professional development coming together with what those trends are and what we should be focusing on in the future to provide professional development statewide. So hopefully that makes sense of what the advisory does. So going back to the origins of vocational ed. Vocational ed came about really for tracking low-income students because many students, back to my sharecropper grandfather, and literally directly, sharecropping was just another way of slavery, just to be honest with you. But he worked in the farm, he grew up in the farm. So he didn't have that official school education, but he sat on the board for 14 years because he believed in whole system change and he believed in something better for his children. And that was my dad. he had 11 kids, and so he sat on a school which was called Christopher Addicks. And to give you a little bit of information, Christopher Addicks is an abolitionist. Christopher Addicks is named after the abolitionist of Christopher Addicks for abolishing slavery that was murder. And so that was the name of the school that was segregated. So a little bit of origins and history about me and why it's so embedded in me in terms of whole system change and transformation. So going back to vocational ed in the 1917, so they just said, okay, here are these workers, but they also need to have a trade, right? So how do we give them a trade? So I love this quote by the National Center, where it talks about, and I have to read it, so forgive me on this, where it talks about the early vocation ed was driven by a philosophy of fitting people to their probable destinies. So kids were tracked from poor families off into becoming worker bees. Now remember, that was 1917 Act, the origins of vocational ed. It's not necessarily, I want to go back to the Carl Perkins 1984 Act, which was he was a member of the House of Representatives, and the special populations expanded. So for those of you who what special populations is, it's defined by a funding source. Again, drawing back to the funding, low income, really it's economically disadvantaged students with disability, homeless, foster youth, single parents, and non-traditional careers. And non-traditional careers is those in terms of, you think of advanced manufacturing and those who identify as females, that we are increasing that, but it's a non-traditional, basically career-wise, if we think about pipeline, for women to go into advanced manufacturing, 25%. So that's how Carl Perkins defines non-traditional. So we definitely have made changes, but we didn't change, and I'm just pointing this out and being transparent, we didn't change the fact that notion and mindset of low income and becoming worker bees, right? And so that impacted, I'm going to talk about culturally, that also impacted the humanity of Black, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, because in terms of, if you know that that's what it was, part of that was as a worker bee, you're not going to have your table talks at home is not going to be about a career technical education. It's going to be the area, it's going to be the pipeline of go academic and transfer. There's many other aspects of that, but I'm just hitting on one of the biggest things and why CTE really, really struggles in having representation of Black, Indigenous people of color for that in those particular courses, right, or classes. So next slide. So with JSPAC, thinking about that, our intent, and how I shifted with the leadership of putting humanity and equity and inclusion from the 80s, because the 80s was very, very focused on the needs of those special population students. And we do need that, but not necessarily the learning needs, right? And so I want to really express that. We, humanity-wise, we need to focus on what is the learning needs. The leadership approach that I'm talking about is, I'm talking about the different learning perspectives that come together. And then we come out with what are those trends and what are the trends that are happening, because you can't hit everything, which I would say in education, we try to hit it all, right? We try to do it all. And it's just impossible to do it all human-wise, period. It just really is impossible to do that. And especially if you don't know the origins, to even understand the origins and know that practices and policies were developed based off of the origins, but wasn't changed. And so going back to humanity first, if we think of humanity first, then the practices, right? And the policies and the practices, we probably would be looking at a very different version. It'd be more of probably a whole systems aspect. So JSPAC's intent with that vision of mine, of intent of, I want us to empower educators, because before we were so focused on the student need, but we're an advisory and we don't touch students. and we're an advisory that comes together and makes recommendations on and discuss the challenges that's going on in our particular region, which is valuable, right? Tremendously valuable in design, but we don't directly touch students. So that was a shift in mindset as well with the advisory, knowing that, because if you're not directly in the classroom, and this is Tony saying this, if you're not directly in the classroom, I can't possibly give you expertise on what the student needs are. But what we can do is we can design professional development and provide equitable access to those who are directly touching the students. They need training. Because going back to teaching and learning, it's a human interaction. So if I'm just teaching you, I don't know how the learning is happening, because you're not allowing that feedback, right? You're not allowing the students to have a voice, and not just what they're learning, but to challenge, to be transparent in the classroom, at the institution. At the institution. That's okay.
Sorry, I just jumped there. I moved my cursor to Tonette.
That's
Sorry.
okay. It's totally okay.
Is it okay, or you want me to go back?
No, move
Sorry.
forward. Move forward to go back to JSPAC's empower. So what do? We empower those that are sitting in this virtual space as a professional to address challenges. Challenges. I didn't say the student challenges. It doesn't say the student challenges. It talks about addressing the challenges that happen for CT students who are recognized. Again, language, recognize the special populations. That was the other thing. We refer to them as if special populations and marginalized people and underrepresented. What does that mean? That doesn't tie it to a humanity. It ties it to a collective group that's identified in our system for funding and for data and for reporting, which we do need that. But humanity first, or just saying recognize in our system, makes a world of a difference in thinking and when you're about to do work. So we design professional development. Thank you. Now you can move on. And I don't want to miss anything that's in the chat. Is there anything that I need to address?
Crystal said something that I was actually thinking about. It says we need training, let it be transparent at the institution. And I was thinking, it felt almost ironic to me to have to provide training on how to be transparent. But I was thinking that maybe that would be something in terms of what we could offer, and being maybe not transparent, but maybe being your authentic self. So she put that in there, and I was like, that's an interesting thought.
I love that. And I actually would like to hear from her a little bit about that. But I want to leave you with this, thinking of that JSPAC we provide. Our mission is to empower Crystal, Ross, Keisha, and I'm sitting here, we're already doing it. For her to be thinking and challenging, that's awesome. But I love this by Dalai Lama. World belongs to humanity, which I'm talking about. Not this leader, not that leader, not that title, not a prince or religion. It belongs to humanity. And we just sit on that for a little bit. I'd love to hear the feedback of what does that do for you when you hear me say that and read it. Anyone?
I think, hi, Tony, and thank you. You were at our Cuesta event the other night. Thank you with Lisa. Thank you so much for being part of that. I didn't get to connect with you during that time. I've been thinking a lot about what you're talking about when you're using the term humanity, because it's dehumanizing people. It has been the way that we justify treating them poorly throughout our history. It's the justification for chattel slavery and the way that we treat our Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, and all people of color in our school system. And that's, when I see humanity, I'm thinking of school resource officers, and I'm thinking of suspensions and, taking childhood away from our Black and brown kiddos. And it's also been the topic of an assignment I did this week. So I've been reflecting on it quite a bit. And I think remembering how important it is to look at every single person that we encounter as a human, as having meaning, regardless of what they physically appear to us, what their economic situation is, because it's very, very, very dangerous when we lose that. And I think we've lost a lot of that in our society, and in looking at schooling and looking at the issues of justice in the classroom, of equitable access in the classroom. And you were talking about tracking and this whole issue with CTE and our preconceived notions of people based on appearances and history that we really, and I as a white teacher have to work on this a lot, because I really definitely drank the Kool-Aid growing up. And so this is something that I am constantly questioning in my response to people. But I just see the damage that it does if we don't center this. So thank you for having this be the focus of this talk.
Rosemary, thank you. And I didn't get a chance to connect with you either, but brilliant, brilliant quest to college. And we do need side talk to connect, and hopefully maybe we can work together on collaborating on something. But thank you. You said exactly what I'm wanting to present and to think about, that it's a part of everything. All of our decisions needs to have that first. And I'm sitting here, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm having to undo that, right? Because that's not exactly how we kind of shape things in society. So when I talk about evolving and constantly learning, I'm having to undo things as well in my thinking process and my behavior. So that's a part of it too, is because I need to look at every single person for what they bring them, right? And then I can decide if I don't like that person. So just being honest, but not like them for all of the things that's been put in my head by society. So I want to make that clear. We're not talking about, oh, let's just all get along and be wonderful together, because that's not being realistic. What I'm saying is let Renee and Rosemary and Crystal come to the table as who I am, who I say I am. And I may so evolve, but don't come to the table looking at me. And don't get me wrong, I know who I am. I identify as a Black woman. But don't come to the table with your judgments and biases of me being Black on top of me being woman. Come to the table judging me on the work that I do. And that is the same way. I'm not just speaking that as a leader. I'm talking about that's the same way when your students step into your classroom. That is the lens that you need to have when your students step in the classroom. Not just a classroom. They need to step on the institution. The moment they hit that institution, and I'm talking about the physical space and even in the virtual space, they need to be treated as a person, regardless if you think that they look sad or what's going on. And if you think they look sad, then have a conversation with them on the side. And that's where that empathy is, to make sure that you are connecting at all times with that individual. It doesn't take much to put humanity first. So I want to just say it really doesn't. But it's sad that we are having to undo that, right? I'm saying for me to undo that, to think of that on a regular basis. In my process, in my practice, when I'm developing things, I'm thinking about the human being, not getting bogged down by the process, not getting bogged down by the practice. So thank you so much. There's just stuff flying in the chat and I can't keep up. So can you tell me what's going on in the chat?
Oh my, there's a lot of good going on in the chat, a lot of good. So let me go back for just a moment. First of all, Keisha made a note, humanity first hits home for me in that it takes it back to the person, the whole, the individually, and the collective, which I think is so important. And then we've got Crystal saying some really good stuff. Becky's saying some stuff. Crystal said, undo and reshape. I don't mean to be weird. That could be a t-shirt right there. Undo and reshape. I love that, Crystal. That's powerful right there. And also Rosemary said we need to be willing to inquire critically into our own thoughts and practices, even the difficult ones. I also want to say, I think sometimes we need to challenge our institutions as well. I think about when I was a professor and, I worked at a campus where parking was a situation. it wasn't easy for students to park and to get to where my class was. So guess what? On the first night of class, I didn't start the moment the class started. I gave a buffer for a couple minutes knowing there'd be new students, they'd be lost. It's nighttime, parking's far. If they're on a bus, it's even further to get to the classroom. And I'll never forget, during one of my very first classes as a professor, I had a student walk in maybe 3 minutes late. At this point, everybody's talking, socializing, you're trying to get the room going, right? She starts hysterically crying the second she sees me. And I looked at her, I was like, oh my gosh, do you need a hug right now? I didn't even know her name. Do you need a hug right now? And she goes, oh my God, please. And I just hugged her. I said, I'm so glad you're here tonight. I'm so sorry that getting here was really stressful, but I'm so thrilled that you're here now. Do you want to go down the hall and like get a drink and just relax a couple minutes before you join the class? And she was so like freaked out about it. And then the interesting thing, I ended up working with her for years. And I can't tell you how many times this student would share that memory. And she said, I got to tell you, when I was driving to school that night, sorry, you guys know I'm emotional. She goes, I wasn't sure I was going to go to school. And after I couldn't find parking and I couldn't find the class, and then I was late to your class, she goes, if you would have met me with anger or frustration or avoidance, I probably never would have gone to school, never would have gotten that degree, never would have gotten my training to be in the workforce. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just hugged you because you were in distress. But that goes back to you, Tonette, and everything in this chat, and talking about this concept of humanity and really embracing where people are. And Crystal said here, Crystal said something that I wanted to share too. And there's so much, meet me where I am going. Meet me where I am going. I love that you can be your authentic self. Empathy matters so much. Keisha said, the sense of belonging, we've been waiting for you. And so it's really like you're saying, Tonette, reframing and challenging our systems and whatnot. You've got a lot of good stuff in the chat, Tonette. I will definitely.
And thank you guys. I want to continue because I know that Renee will have some interview questions, but I want to touch on what kind of what we're talking about, belonging, and this is about leadership, right? This is a presentation about leadership practice and what's my style. And I want to leave you with one of the things I want to talk about really quickly is, if you have a chance, look up Harvard's Business Review and follow them. I love following it. And they have this is an article in 2019 about hiring. And so I had talked about the fact that like women of color, and I can even go into that, like women of color in terms of leadership, it's very challenging, right? And really speaking on women of color in leadership. And I don't want to devalue women themselves from being in leadership positions. And so I'll touch very quickly, women in education in leadership positions is disproportionately off. And that's because, and I'll share again with the Harvard, that's because why? Men are easily promoted. Now, even though women representation of white women in education as being teachers, it's definitely higher. I think they're like the majority. But in terms of women being in leadership roles, it's disproportionately and it's male dominated. But then we go into the complexity of women of color in leadership roles.
No, you have to be patient. She's allowed to do her music as she wants it.
Oh, yes, that's right. Be patient and let music. Whoever it is, I'm going to agree with that. But women of color in leadership roles are usually, now I know their journey, if they're in administration and they're in a leadership role, their journey has been incredible. It's same thing. You're looked as fix it. Fix the issue. And I'll be honest, what did I say? To be transparent, I said I was asked to take an advisory from the 80s and bring them into the 21st century. And it has taken a lot to get there. Let me tell you, a whole lot within that. And especially if you are a woman of color. So it's the Harvard Business Review talks about hire leaders for what they can do, not what they have done in the past. Going back to what Crystal said and what I'm saying, take me for what I bring to the table. And in this business review, it talks about the Peter principle. If you're not familiar with Lawrence Peter, his theory was that most competent people are promoted until they reach a position that is above their skill level, and then there's no growth. And promotions are based on performances, meaning there's an assumption that the individuals that have these attributes, right, because of performance level, are going to be more successful when the responsibility change. But that explanation totally explains why there's so many challenges in incompetency in leadership. And even that brings me to next slide. This brings me to my why. So I would say why there's only one leadership style. And so my why there's only one leadership style. My why in doing this, next slide. We're going to stop a little bit and I'm going to do a little interactive before we go into my why, and I promise we'll get there. Highly recommend read Hire Leaders for what they can do, not what they have to done, and look into the Peter Principle by Lawrence Peter on his theory about competent people are always being promoted, and we should be looking at those who have the complexity, right, and uncertainty that can step up during their aspects, and those are attributes that we should be looking at because they have the ability to be open-minded. So I have 4 stages in my cycle. What am I? Here's a hint. I'm an egg. I'm a pupa. What am I? Just throw it in the chat really quick. Or speak. Undo your mic and tell me what it is very, very quickly. Caterpillar. 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 I see lots of caterpillars. Caterpillar. Caterpillar. Let's go to the next slide. I am the metamorphosis. I'm the life 4 stages of a butterfly. So my why started, I was a kid that grew up in a country that's only 250 population and still is. It's a population, rural area in Cope, Illinois. But in the country, you're able to really look at lots of things and have experience. A butterfly has always been my symbolism. Just so you know a little bit, always has been my symbolism. And when I was younger, I used to spend hours, and I'm not making this up, looking at the tree, at the cocoon, right? Like waiting for it, for the not knowing as a little kid, waiting for it to come out because I was just so interested in what was the difference. What was going to be the surprise at the end of that, of the butterfly and the evolution? Always interested in the change, right? The metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is a Greek word. It means transformation, change. Transformation, change. And I had mentioned earlier that was why I believe in transformational change. So going back to my origins, literally that I love butterflies. And then I would catch a caterpillar, right? This is so terrible. Catch a caterpillar and put it, I'm sure if this resonates with anyone, and put it in a little jar. And I don't know what I was expecting, but I was expecting it to turn into a butterfly without understanding the metamorphosis of the aspect of a change. And you have to go through all of these changes, but it's a continuum, right? It's a continuum. Next slide, please. There is always value in asking yourself. So this is I'm taking through part of my why. There's no value in asking yourself, am I a leader? I always struggled with that when people would ask me, like, why would I ask myself that? It's about who am I leading and what am I leading them to and where am I going? Right? It's not about, and it goes back to Dalai Lama, the world is right? The world, the humanity of the world. It's not about me being, am I a leader? And that aspect. It's stripping away those egos and labels and going back to what my definition is about education and humanity, free of biases. And the more you learn, to me, that teaching, learning, interaction, looking at it from this perspective, it should free you And that's that undoing. And that it should free you of how you were thinking, right? Of the biases, and opens your mind to question even more. There's just stuff going so much in the chat, and I love it. I love that. Do we want to that really quickly to
And it's really good. So I don't know if you want me to jump on it, but there's just really
just
good.
jump on it? I mean, it's about humanity, and that's my approach. So let's jump on this.
Okay, Leah reminds us that it takes our attention from ourself and it takes the focus from ourself, which I think is really important. It's about, Bobby said, it's about what needs to happen to improve people's lives. Also, I love this too. Crystal put, who am I leading and where am I going? And just that reflection and really thinking about it, you know. I also want to shout out, Becky made a comment. She is going to put a link to a speaker she saw last week that she thinks might be really good with the group. Becky, I have the blurb, but not the link. So if you don't mind reposting that, that would be great. But this is a rich chat happening today for sure.
It's wonderful. And Becky, thank you for it. What is the name of the individual, Becky, that he Cambron or something like that?
Oh, Becky. Oh,
Yemeni or Yemeni. She said it like yay me, Cabron, and she was wonderful. She came to a presentation at Bakersfield College, and her symbol was the butterfly too. And she actually gave everybody a kit so they could draw their own butterfly. And anyway, it's a wonderful site. She did a beautiful job. Her activism and advocacy for immigrants and her work with them, it was just a beautiful presentation. And so I think you would all enjoy it. And your talk about the butterfly just brought that memory back. So it might be something you'd be interested in.
Well, thank you, Becky, and thank you for joining
You're
us in
welcome.
this presentation. And so when we think about that, great leaders is to predict the future, not to reward the past. So going back to that Peter Lawrence principle of we base getting leaders based off of what they've done in the past, and going back to it's what we do and where we're going. And it's the same thing with what Crystal was talking about, the students. Where are they trying to go to? Not meeting them right. We oftentimes think, let me meet them right now. And that's a part of it. But we also need to put consciously in our head is about where are they heading? And looking at it from the perspective of when we think about presently what their needs is, we oftentimes psychologically think of fixing. I think fix goes with that. Let me fix the student. Let me fix my staff. Let me fix this aspect. And that is a very deficient thinking mindset. Thinking about where we're heading and where we're leading, right? And how do we take Becky's strengths, right? And move that in where we're heading and where Becky is trying to head. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. Let me assist and help. So that brought me to my why in terms of there's not just one philosophy of leadership. You can't just be great leaders. This is Tony speaking. You can't just have one philosophy of leadership. Now we have multiple, next slide, leadership styles that we're aware of, and I'll just go through those very quickly. We have a directive leadership style that we're aware of. If anyone's not aware, it's on the slide, but I'd be happy to kind of go through that a little bit. It's a hierarchy: values, consistency, control, and predictability. There's transformative, which I talked a lot about. There's transformative and individualized, inspirational, which has a lot to do with my traits. If you were going to because we're very good about categorizing people. So I'm just going to say that my categorizing thing. So motivational, ethical, challenges assumptions, and wants to empower people, which is what JSPAC does. It empowers, wanting to empower our practitioners. Servant leadership, we hear that a lot. I'm a servant leader. I use servant leadership style. It means you serve your team and your organization first before you serve what your personal perspectives are. Participative, building trust and commitment creative. It's a team consensus. It's a whole systems change, because in order to have a whole systems change, you got to have that team consensus, and got to have not just a team consensus, you got to have those different perspectives to get to that consensus and what that shared vision and knowledge is. Then there's the authoritative one, sets the tone, the vision, long-term goals. I know this sounds extremely familiar because I'm going to go there with transparency. If that's nothing but education and institutional aspect, I don't know what is. Just being real. So we've got our unions, right? The teacher unions for a reason. Not saying for a union. We have our academic senates for a reason. We have governments for a reason. But again, based on some origin, right? And so if we go back to, are we challenging that? Are we asking the questions with that, considering where we're heading now for the future in education and for the diverse learning? I said learning, didn't say diverse people, the diverse learning needs, and then the people, learning needs of the people, not the race, not that aspect. Have we changed? Have we challenged those? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there because that's what I'm here today. I'm a challenger, I said, on a part for you to walk away and start thinking about things. And then there's that transactional leadership. I really think transactional, forgive me, is such government and security and just saying leader, follower, follower-based leader, and they're clearly defined goals. None of these styles are wrong. I'm going to say it again. None of these styles are wrong. Going back to the slide before, you don't have to, but that's why I said from my approach, there is not one philosophical leadership style approach, but we often use that one style. Many do. I particularly navigate. It depends on, to me, it depends on that particular project. It depends on the institution. It depends on the people. Going back to my very first slide, leadership is the people. Leadership is the people. Very quickly, anybody on here want to say, well, here's where I'm at, and really be honest, what's your style? Transformative, you go back and forth, anybody?
I was just going to say, hi, everyone. This is Keisha, and thank you so much, Tonette. I was just going to say, I think it fluctuates. And also, in my experience, what I remember is having a particular style, and then the culture of where I was dictated whether that style stayed or I had to move my style to survive in that culture. So you may come to a culture one way, and I've even remember going into a culture because they wanted my leadership style. And then once I got there, decided that it didn't fit for them, so they wanted me to change my leadership style. So
true. Keisha, thank you. So true. That's why I said there's not one, there's really going through, there's not one that you would use. So there's no wrong style here. But I will say what may be wrong is using the same style because you're not navigating or understand humanity. I'm gonna go back to humanity first. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges is to get ourselves as a leader out of that, well, this is my style and this is how I'm going to lead.
Tonette, in the chat a little while ago, Keisha put something else that I thought was really interesting. She said, this fits so into the conversation about teacher control of children of color. Let me fix you. And I think that's a huge part is people are told like, oh, you're going to go in and fix this. Here's the gap. Here's the achievement gap. Here's this gap. Here's that gap. And as if that's just your only cause. And I love how you're really saying to break it down and that it can be how we identify over time changes too as leaders.
Thank you for saying it. And that was going back on when I was talking about the special populations and really indirectly. So let me go back to it and say, I want to believe indirectly that the people that were designing what the needs are of a student, and even now, even I would say now in the classrooms, and I sit on multiple committees and observe a lot, and I do hear a very fixated, I'm going to fix the student. May not in those words, but it's coming from that perspective, like something's wrong when I step on your institution with me, and so you need to fix me. And just absolutely has to be written, period, across, I mean, just, and even with staff, right? even the hierarchy of maybe dean with faculty and dean, and faculty with counselors, and then even that culture, the intercultural, and I'm talking about organizational wide, of counselors and faculty, right? Chairs and counselors, even that from that standpoint, well, you wouldn't know because you're not a teacher, right? I'm just saying that mindset, or the counselor will let me, you don't know because we're going to fix them, right? From that perspective. So instead of putting the humanity first, we can move on from, thank you so much. You guys are just putting so much input and I'm enjoying this. Next slide.
Okay, Crystal has her hand
Krista
up.
has a question. Yes.
I didn't have a question. I had more so feedback in regards to the leadership styles. I was going to say, in regards to the people that you're leading at the time, or what your audience is that you are leading, would dictate your leadership style in that moment and for what your mission is, for purpose.
Thank you, Crystal. You're absolutely right. So my why comes from, I said, the metamorphosis and transformative change, and I was taking you through that journey. But here's my statement. My purpose is to be participating in cultivating transformation change, of valuing the humanity of people. Period. That's my philosophy in terms of my leadership style and what I'm bringing in approach. And then for me, transformational change should occur. It is a whole systems change, not just the people. Next slide. So I want to give my 2 cents. This is my 2 cents if we're thinking about a leader, and we can finish this. My 2 cents is great educators never stop learning. And with that, I think that we have the time for, I think Renee has it. And the last slide, I want to leave up one of my favorite things that I think about. Be the leader you want to follow. I'm not going to ask anyone to do something I wouldn't do and doesn't align with the core values of the team and organization. Ever. And I've worked with Renee and she knows that. I'm going to roll up my sleeves with you and we're going to go through the guidance, through the steps. We may be frustrated at times, but we're going to make it happen. There's times where I'm such a big visionary that times I can tell that my team is just like, I don't know about this, right? Like, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it, Tony. But they don't say it, but it gets done and we do it.
I think, Tonette, you're a big thinker. And so the people that work with you need to learn to trust you. That's something over time where I've worked with you and we go into a new project or something and you're explaining like this one way of it. And it's like, I'm getting what I'm thinking it is. And then all of a sudden it comes back another way. And so, but I've learned that if I trust you for the journey, we always get where we need to be. And that to me, if you can trust your leader or your leaders, that's the best place. How many of us have had leaders we didn't trust? And that's a very tricky place to be in because you're constantly evaluating every decision. Whereas you're with a leader that you trust and you know that their interest is your interest at the front of what they do. That's a quality leader.
Thank you. And I believe in the team that I'm in. I don't feel like I'm a leader. And I will say that. I don't come in like, oh, I'm going to lead it. Right? That's a whole different story. Next, and I'll leave you with Martin Luther King. And if you know my presentations, I love this quote. May I stress the need for courageous, intelligent, and dedicated leaderships. Leaders of sound integrity. And that's what we're talking about. A big portion of this is integrity. Leaders not in love with publicity. Oh my goodness, boy, did we experience that in the past couple of years. But in love with justice. And we experience it at our institution. So, another thing, the education is so about how do we present ourselves to the public? And why are we that way? Because of the public is driving that. But we need to think about humanity first. Leaders not in love with money, but in love with humanity. And this all ties back to Dalai Lama, going back there. And leaders who can subject their particular egos to the greatness of the cause. So thank you so much. We can get to the interviewing questions if you'd like. I can't hear you. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted twice there. Let's start off with a round of applause for Tonette. Thank you so much, Tonette. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I want to open it up now to what questions everybody has. I have a list of questions that I'm hoping to ask Tonette some of them, but just seeing this robust discussion within the chat, I'm going to just quiet up for a minute and I'm going to open the floor and see who wants to have some questions for Tonette and maybe that she can address right now.
Oh, come on, you guys. You have no questions?
We're reflecting.
Okay, that's, you know what? Thank you. You're absolutely right. You need that space to reflect. Big on that, reflecting on what to say. Absolutely.
Becky also had something good in the chat I want to make sure I share, and then we'll come right to Crystal. Becky put, it makes me think of Bev Boss, and for those who are early childhood who are on right now, Bev Boss is dear to our heart. Don't be the teacher you think you should be the teacher that you wanted. In that moment, ask yourself, what would I have wanted? I also think myself personally, what would I have needed? Because I think about times in my life when I didn't have the teacher that I needed due to some trauma in my, going on, and gosh. Okay, let's go head over to Crystal.
My question was, how are you able to tap in to find out the origin of CTC and be able to challenge the perspective to become holistic in its movement and change?
Wow. Can you repeat it one more time? I want to make sure that I address this. Because you said you packaged that question up, which was good.
It's so much meat that you gave us today, and I'm just curious to find out, because first it's inherited, because this is something your grandfather was doing or part of a mission of change. So I'm curious because I'm on the same mission to purpose. I don't know everything, but you're tapping into the challenging of different things as far as its original state, to be more inclusive, to be present in our current times, to be a leadership or an organization that is more focused on the people versus its original, maybe origin purpose that was written for its content. How did you be able to step in this position to be able to challenge this, to bring it into a holistic change or perspective, if I clarify?
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate that. And you're right, a big part of it was the origins of my grandfather. And I didn't share also that the spunkiness, and this is on my mom's side, the spunkiness of my grandmother, she had a food truck. So I'm going to answer your question. She had a food truck, which means she was a CTE component, right? Entrepreneurship falls under career technical education. And she had Stella's food truck that in a predominantly, I just said 250 population. And I went briefly to SIU. So let me give you a shout out to that aspect of Salukians, but I graduated from SDSU in California. So, so I'm an Aztecian, I will say that, Aztecian. But when I was 6 years old, I was on that food truck with her. And so I would do the money. I don't, for whatever reason, at 6 years old, I don't know how I can't give you that, but she had me like taking the money and then count out, right? So, which was so crazy, right? If I think about mentor and the fact that in that rural area, this woman, right, my grandmother decides, I'm going to do a kiosk truck for the students, right, for the campus students, which now is very popular, but that was in the 70s, which was not popular, right? So just using an example, which is not popular at all. So she is a big part of that big vision that I'm talking about, bigger vision, like this woman, this little woman, and I'm small too. This little woman's just like, well, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. And that's kind of where the nature of it, of part of where that stems from. But I have always been a huge fan of history from early on. I'm just going to say that because I always, as a kid, have always been curious about, well, sometimes it doesn't make sense. Like telling me, I'd be a kid telling me that I need to package up oranges. I'm going to use Christmas, a tradition that we know in the Baptist church, and you have a bag of, somebody's smile, you have the bag of oranges and candy. And I would never, ever take it, right, in church as a kid. And so the reason why I didn't understand, but later, you know, as being in education, is because I didn't understand. I didn't need it. Right? I didn't need it. And nobody ever told me in church that that was for to give to the give to other families for food wise. Never explaining, so I'm using an example of origins, right? Why you have to do your, it's okay to question why things, why even culturally things are done the way they are done, because if you don't know the origins behind it, it may not make sense, or you may want to change that. And that's something my mother would always say: if you do not like the way things are done, change it, Tony. Change it when you become an adult. Make the change. So I always remember that's one for me. So with CTE, my father, I would like, and that's something that with my grandmother, I'm talking about the origins, but that drove her crazy. She's always like, why are you always asking me about the history? Like I always ask you, like she says again, why are you always asking me all these questions? I don't know. So I don't know. I just do it. That was her personality. I just do it because I want to do it. Right. I'm just sharing that was my grand's personality.
You helped me, my grandma too. Go ahead on today.
So for me, I'm going to do it because I need to understand the origins. I'm not going to do it because you say that I'm supposed to do it. And so honestly, my parents recognized that very early with me. So they knew that we need to explain, right? We need to provide some information to her. And so now we have this world of, I was that child, Crystal, that would go to the library. And I went to a Catholic school and only 3 blacks. So my parents felt like that foundation of that education for me was the right fit. Meanwhile, I was segregated from my family, right? From my culture, because most of my time in school was here. But after school, because I couldn't ride the bus because the bus didn't want to pick up a black child from a Catholic school. So I'm just sharing a little bit. I couldn't ride the bus, and this is kind of why I have this, like, I'm going to still, part of me. So I couldn't ride the bus. And so to wait for my grandfather, who is Irish, white, it's the only grandfather that I knew of on my mom's side. On my dad's side, yes, he's black and the sharecropper. But to wait for him to pick me up, I would walk to the library. And so when I would walk to the library and wait for him, that's where I would just immerse myself into, and then still question, because there's a white neighbor, right? White, and still question. So that's really the reason why I stress origins is so important. And I don't know everything because it's constantly finding more information now that we have the technology that we have to have access to all of the information. So hopefully that helps you. So I brought that, everything you do, and this is one of my mentors that said this to me, everything that you do is transferable. You just got to dig deep and use that. So I will say that what my mentor said to me, which is a retired Eastern vice president, is everything you do, Tony, can be used as transferable to do the job that you're doing, no matter what you're going to do.
Can you literally see multiple people on the line writing this down right now? Because you said that, and all of a sudden I look and there's all these heads looking down and writing notes. I love it. I love it. I love it. Who else has questions or comments for Tonette? I've got some, like I said, but I'd love to keep it open with everybody who's here right now.
Tonette, I just wanted to say thank you. You're confirming some things for me, and I actually just sent a little private chat to LaTanya Hardy from Trey Tech. We're working on a project, and some of the things that you shared brought light to what we were trying to figure out, and it helped bring some things together. But I will say that I appreciate the stories, because and I wrote in the chat, I think part of our culture and part of who many of us are is to be storytellers. Yes. And we know that comes back from our culture in Africa, that stories are what saved us and kept us and brought us and so on. And so part of that, going back to the history and understanding it and being able to marinate it, is that piece of the telling of the story. And I also believe that that's how we can grow and learn from each other. And that's one of the things we keep going back to for this project is even if you have done some of these wrongs, if we can at least tell you the story of what happened, then the humanity in you should hopefully grab you enough to say, I need to make a change. And so I just want to thank you for that. We're probably going to use a couple of your quotes. I'm sure you'll be hearing about it really soon. And Renee, as soon as we have a date and everything, but we're going to do a save the date. As soon as we have it, Renee, I'll get it to you. But it really gives me pause, and it gives me speed to say it's time for this to happen. So thank you again.
Thank you, Keisha. And thank you for saying the last part. It's time for this to happen, right? And culturally, yes, we do have our stories, but I want to say everybody has a story. And so we have to create the humanity part. It's okay to create that space to allow people to have that story. And that goes back to transfer, right? How do I transfer my story into the work and what I believe in and what it is that I'm doing? And what you're doing today doesn't mean that that's what you're going to be doing tomorrow. So I really appreciate it is time for us to allow the storytelling, which doesn't take away from teaching and learning, right? That human interaction. But I think we've been I know I kind of grew up that way, but always challenged that is that, okay, here's your academic, right? Your academic. And so there's no story, right? That you just do your work and study. And so, and to get your degrees. But really what I'm bringing to the table, and sounds like you are too, is I'm saying your story is a part of that entire journey in your, whatever it is, it's your academic. Because if you don't do that, then we create leaders, going back to where leaders that are disconnected from themselves. Therefore, how can they be connected with their team?
Or disconnected to a falsehood.
Yes, yes, you said it. Yes, disconnected
Right?
to a falsehood, right? Absolutely, disconnected from falsehood. So any other, and Renee, if you want to ask me any questions or.
I'm like writing all these notes right now because this is just giving me a lot to think about. I'm just going to be honest, because we don't always create the space, and sometimes our institutions and our systems of education make it seems like creating the space is a waste of time. And I just think about like when I was an elementary school teacher, and one time I created a space with a situation with my students that developmentally I had to approach it this one way, and I had teachers like fighting me about it. And I was like, no, no, no. And finally I got to the point where I said, okay, I'm gonna make you all a deal. If my students test the same at the end of the year as your students, then will you stop questioning my rationale for why I create space, why I have community circles, why I allow my 10-year-olds in my classroom to take time to talk every day? And they were like, yeah, okay, whatever. We'll see if her kids test any better, right, or test the same. They all assumed my students, because I valued having that space, we're going to have a deficit otherwise in the academics. You know what happened? We had a ton of space the whole year. We had community circle was something I've always done when I was in the classroom. And so we literally created space every single day for these type of conversations. My kids tested higher than the other 6 classrooms of 5th grade students. And I had less formal academic time with them. So it's interesting because if you take the humanity, a lot of the other stuff comes together. When you feel human and you feel whole, you're going to be able to learn better and faster, right? And whether that's in a classroom with kids or you're being led by a leader who's allowing you to be human, right? It transfers in both places. So Tonette, so sorry, I'm thinking all these things right now, but I want to know, why do you continue to lead? Being a leader's not easy. Why do you continue to lead, Tonette?
I like that. And it's not, I'll start with, I'll be honest about here that one of the biggest challenges as a leader, it's emotionally draining at times. It really is. It's just, but you know what? I believe in the whole system's change. So the greater cause, that's why I continue to lead. It's not about me, right? It's not. This is not about Tonette. This is about humanity. This is about the world evolving, and what's in the world is the people. So yes, I get emotionally drained as a leader, but I always have in my mind, and that's where that humbleness comes back to. Remember I talked about humbleness, about I don't know everything. I'm emotionally drained. I'm not going to know everything. I'm constantly learning new things. I learned today from everyone some aspects that I'm going to take away. So that's why I continue to lead. But I'm also a leader. I think one of the things about being a leader is being able to just be in your space and let others lead. That's a big piece. And we're so hard, and that's what it's the trust, right? And going back to that participative, building that trust and commitment. I trust, I'm coming in with trust. I'm not trying to come in and be like, I don't trust you. But part of me coming in with trust is that I had to do a lot of, and this is culturally, I have to do a lot of self-reflection because of the origins, right? So because of the origins, said, you can't come here. You don't deserve to come here. So that breaks my trust right there. But I don't bring that. I have been learned enough to let go of that. To let go of that trust factor, that I got to trust you in order for the greater cause. Well, if I say that I got to trust you, I think about Martin Luther King. Do you think that he trusted every single person? I mean, that, you know what I mean? I'm just thinking about, you think Gandhi, Mother Teresa, literally. But I think that they went in thinking, I'm not gonna get caught up in the fact of my ego that I don't trust you. I'm gonna go in and know that I trust you to get to this greater cause. That's why I lead. Great question.
I love that. I love that response too. I'm wondering too, you are an intentional leader. And one thing that I was thinking about as somebody who's, behind the scenes for this today, I usually pin the speaker, and I'm like, Tonette's not going to want to be pinned. She's going to want everybody who's here to have their face on the screen. And so I didn't ask you ahead of time, but all of a sudden I was like, once we got off the PowerPoint, I was like, oh, should I pin her? And I was like, that's not Tonette, because you're an intentional leader. So as an intentional leader, Tonette, how do you create other opportunities for other people in leadership?
I really love this question, and thinking about the word intentional. I think Crystal put in the chat intentional right off the bat, and probably didn't even realize that you were going to ask that. But I have infinite hope for humanity, and so my journey in education is I'm forever a student. I think of myself as a student all the time. I see intentional leadership for me is continuous cultivation of practicing listening and showing interest in people first. One of the things, and I know you know this, is that I always ask, how are you doing? Before we start any meeting, I always take the time to set the tone of the meeting, to really ask. It doesn't matter how many people it is, if you get on first, I ask, how are you doing? And how's life? I remember some of the little pieces of that you shared with me, everyone shared with me. And if we connect again, I'm going to ask you about that. And so that, and especially in times of uncertainty, there's people who step up in those times. And those are the ones, and I'm talking about intentional leadership for opportunities, those are the ones that should be engaged in the brainstorming, in the planning, in the communication. When we went through this pandemic, and just to share with you, started this pandemic, and you Renee, started your educational consulting, right? And the community of practice. And so here we are, more than 10 years, but in the pandemic, now we are collaborating in something that we both do. I do something else, lead something else, and you have your educational consultant. But part of that, again, leadership opportunities, I knew your transparent skill set, and I knew that what you could do. So I believed in you, and you have been along this humanity journey with me when I presented to you that this is my vision, which is almost 2 years ago, of elevating humanity, right? So when you think, going back to here, there's an opportunity right there. I don't forget, here's an opportunity.
I'm getting teary-eyed, Tonette, too, because last week I gave 2 national workshops on humanity.
And you are so embracing, right? That's your language, and it's that metamorphorism. Who are along my journey, lots of reflection and professional development, for me and the people I'm working for.
Leah just put something powerful here. Great leaders create leaders.
Wow.
That's a
Leah, I love you.
huge part. We also need a t-shirt that says infinite hope for humanity. Thank you, Tonette. Like,
you and your t-shirt thing, right? I just want to tell everyone Renee is a big t-shirt person.
okay, that graphic behind Tonette right at this minute, that is a heart. Wouldn't you buy a t-shirt of that? The moment she created that graphic, I'm like, we need t-shirts of that, Tonette, because it's powerful. So yeah, I'm in a t-shirt mode right now, I guess. Oh, I love it. What other questions? We only have about 8 more minutes with Tonette, but what other questions do we have for her right now? I want to open it up again. I'm watching the chat. We're getting great chat comments. Anybody else have anything? If not, I do have one more that I'd like to ask Tonette. Okay, I think we'll have enough time for her to reflect on this question, then maybe one more question if anybody has one. But Tonette, I'd like to know, especially given where we are right now in terms of everything in life, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of George Floyd and everything that's happened, just where we are in the space right now. What advice do you have for education leaders at this moment in history?
I would say, I kind of touched on that a little bit, that, great educators are constantly learning. But in the space that we're in right now, I want to say that we're going to be in that space for a while. So let me just put that. And that space that I'm talking about is uncertainty. And we really have been taught, to me, in terms of education, that we're certain. And those, to me, who have had a multiple complexity of life experiences, and I'm going to say this, right? And what I mean by that is, now I'm going to bring in those labels. You are a person of color. Maybe you identify as a woman, or I'll even go there. You identify as in the LGBTQ plus community, plus being a person of color. You bring so much level of experiences, right? And opportunities to me. And I look at that from this kaleidoscope, right? That you have this kaleidoscope lens that's already built, that's kind of there. So the more, I guess what I'm saying is, the more that you go through this uncertainty that we're in, embrace that uncertainty. Embrace that uncertainty and let go. There's where the ego is. Let go of the fact that you don't know where it's going. Let go of the fact that you have to have a finite answer for our students, for people. We are in uncertainty. That means that we're in that metamorphosis of change. My advice is that, and I think saying it is different than acting, than role modeling that behavior. So I would like to be very clear about that I'm making that statement. But when you get off of this call, and I'm saying this, I have presentations, because I've made lots of presentations, and I hear like, oh, that was great, I'm so inspirational. But what are you going to do in your life to act on that emotion to change that. Because if you have decided that this was good and I like this and I'm in this virtual space and that's it, and then you get off in this virtual space no matter what, and you are not practicing that, then it is done nothing. It's done nothing.
Wonderful, Tonette. Anybody for a final question?
Improving lives.
I love that.
I
Well-
will leave you with one of my, I got a mentor, and I would say I would really stress mentorship. You know, we don't get enough of that. And I want to speak on the fact that we think that we're supposed to go out and get a mentor. And I was thinking about this because when I was the age of 9 and 10, I spent once a week with Dr. Helen Bass. Look her up. She's the first African-American that taught at Purdue. And she happened to live in the little town, retired by then, the little town of Culp. For whatever reason, my dad felt like it was important that I spend some time with her. And so those 2 years that I spent once a week with her, I learned about Selma because she was marching with Selma with Martin Luther King. So I had that direct impact, I want to say. And so she was a mentor to me. So what I'm going to say is that I look back and think, you don't have to go out and get a mentor. What you can do, and I'm offering that too, if I'm sitting here and you like the things that I'm doing or the things that I'm saying that I can help grow, right? Help advance your growth, then let's talk. Let's sit down and have those conversations. That is what mentorship is. It doesn't just have to be like, I need to go get the mentor that's at this leadership level, right? She just happened to be, I said, at 9 and 10, so impressionable to me. I learned about the Women's Amendment. That's what, again, origins. At that age, right? I learned about the Grimm sisters. She talked about the Grimm sisters in the 100th Amendment, where there are 2 white women that were so profound and part of the 100th Amendment. From her, right? From this, an African American woman that probably had some, she identified as African American, but I can tell you now that she probably was multicultural, looking back at her and her journey of teaching at Purdue, but she also worked with part of the Selma, right? Back then, there's so much that what I'm saying is that you can choose who you want to be your mentor. You don't have to wait. I sat for 5 years, I just sat down on a board here in San Diego. It's the second largest Black theater community. It's called Common Ground Theater. For 5 years, I sat on that board as the secretary. But 5 years, I learned so much about the origins of San Diego and the culture in San Diego from these amazing women and the founder, and the founder of Dr. Jaffney, and the history and how they played a role in education and how they play a role locally in San Diego and who I need to be connected. So much that they inspired me that I joined the Black Political American Association chapter in San Diego. So again, that I didn't join that because they said, oh, let me be your mentor. But when I got in that environment, I took on the role of, let me embrace everything that they're about to share with me.
That goes back to what you were saying, Tonette. Let me transform. You're going to take this opportunity and transform. It's part of this constant development, like you're saying. That was fantastic. I think all of us are going to go, maybe sit down, reflect a little bit right now. And maybe a glass of wine. I don't know. I feel like we should all be hanging out in my backyard now. Let's all talk for a little bit and process this. Tonette, so much to think about. even just in terms of my own reflection as a leader and an educator, and just you are so wonderful and valuable, and I'm grateful for you being here today. Let's again give another shout out to Tonette Salter. Beautiful work today, Tonette. Thank you so much for coming, speaking
Thank
with
you, you
us,
guys.
inspiring us, and keep being stellar, because that's who you are, Tonette, and you are deeply appreciated.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this. And remember, anybody that wants to connect on LinkedIn, I'm very responsive. So you can have a question outside. I'm extremely responsive to people no matter what. So take care. And remember to keep humanity close. It's right here, everywhere.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
good. Everybody have a good weekend. Keep
Hi,
humanity.
Tony. I'm sorry I was so checked out. The stove repair guy came, and so I had to just mute and turn off everything. And
That's okay. I'm so glad to see your face. And I want to tell you congratulations on your new home.
yes,